Good morning. It's time for CEO Chat. It's 11:30. It's Friday. My name is Al Cini,
I'm Joe Osamendi.
and we have a great show, actually a holiday show. If this is the season of giving, we're going to be talking about a book called The Go-Giver, and we're blessed today to have two avid readers of the book, Bill Borton on my far right, and Charley Timmins. But also joining us via Skype, and we'll be spending a lot of time talking to the author, Bob Burg, the author of The Go-Giver. But what I'd like to do really is start with Charley, because Charley, I think you said you read the book 7 years ago, is that right?
Yeah, I have a coaching practice for executives and professionals. I try to help them on their journey to being the best version of themselves. And having read The Go-Giver, I said, you can't be the best version of yourselves without giving. And so every one of my clients, we work very closely with the book. I get them to understand how to apply it, whether it's in networking or business practice, we do that.
That's and one of the people you gave the book to is Bill Borton.
Absolutely.
So you spread the word about The Go-Giver to Bill, and then Bill, what did you do with it?
Well, I read it.
Okay, it's a good start.
I read it in 2 sittings, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And interesting, while I read it, I laughed, I cried. The first 4 chapters, I said, this is me. This is who I am. And it validated who I am. And then when I got to the 5th chapter, I realized why I really needed to read the book. And that was my aha moment. But
That was your aha moment.
It was. But I was so inspired that I just decided that this is going to be how I live my life going forward. And I started buying copies of the book and giving them to people.
Oh, that's
Really?
great. And I think it's the message of the book, as I understand it, and Bob, we're about to jump over to you. You can correct me where I'm wrong. You get more by giving and helping than you do by thinking about what you want. So I know, Bill, you always say it's about the other person.
Yeah, it's not about
you.
it's not about you. It's about the other person. And my favorite law is your influence is a direct result of how abundantly you place other people's interests first.
That's one of the 5 laws in the
Yeah.
book. Is that right?
It is.
Great, Bob.
Yes, sir. Hi.
Hi. How are you? I can't tell you how grateful we are to have you here talking about your book, because there are important lessons in it. As I'm listening to Charley and Bill, and I've known these guys for a long time, you could read The Go-Giver as somebody who needs to change their lives by changing their orientation, or you could read The Go-Giver if you want validation for something that you already are doing, which is really to get what you want by giving to people first. Is that right?
It is, and you make a great point in that so many people, like Bill, like Charley, who are great embodiments of the message themselves, the first adopters of The Go-Giver, when it came out, they were the already successful people, the high producers, the leaders, the people who are already living their lives and conducting their businesses this way. John David Mann, my awesome co-author and really the lead writer, the storyteller, we've always said that there's nothing original in this book. We may have called the laws we may have named them certain ways and put it in story form, but there's nothing new. And so what happened was these first adopters, they would then share the message with other people, and that's when sort of the second wave of people came in, as you mentioned, the ones who needed to make a change. Really, you make a great point about the focus being so key, because the basic premise is nothing more than shifting your focus from getting to giving. And when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing value to others. And that doing so is not only a nice way, a pleasant way of conducting business, but a very financially profitable way as well. Because let's face it, no one's going to buy from you because you need the money. They're not going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet, and they're not going to buy from you even though you're a really nice person. They're going to buy from you only because they believe they'll be better off by doing so than by not doing so. So this just says to the salesperson, to the entrepreneur, we've got to put our focus on pleasing that other person, which is why we say that money is simply an echo of value.
I think that is such an important point. Remember, our program is called CEO Chat. So the people who watch our program are people who own businesses or who manage departments inside of large companies. Everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's working their own agenda. I mean, that generally is how everybody imagines business works. And what you're really telling us in your book, Bob, is that by trying to understand somebody else's agenda, we're actually more likely to make progress on getting what we want out of our own. Is that right?
That's it in a nutshell. I mean, that's stated perfectly. Dale Carnegie in his classic How to Win Friends and Influence People, what I believe his underlying premise was, it was stated in his sentence, ultimately people do things for their reasons, not our reasons. So the great influencer, the great leader who also understands that no one's going to follow them because they want to be followed, right? Mm-hmm. And so the great leader, the great influencer, what they do is they ask themselves questions such as, how does what I'm asking this person to do, how does it align with their goals, their wants, their needs, their desires, their values? And when asking those questions intelligently and thoughtfully, genuinely, authentically, not as a way to manipulate another person into doing our will, but as a way to build everyone in the process, now as leaders, we've come a lot closer to earning that commitment as opposed to depending upon compliance, which is never sustainable.
Wow, that is, so this book is really written not just for people who sell for a living, but for people who lead others, for people who run companies, for people who craft the vision of their companies. They all really need to be reading this book, isn't that right?
I thank you for that, and yes, we would agree with that. And a lot of leadership groups and leaders have utilized this book for that purpose. Even though Joe in the story is a sales professional, it really kind of like any universal law or principle, it translates across the board.
Well, that's great. So, Bob, could you drill down a little bit for us? I know there are 5 laws in your book. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can kind of outline those for us.
Sure. The 5 are the laws of value, compensation, influence, authenticity, and receptivity. And the law of value, which says your true worth in the business sense, is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. Now, that sounds counterintuitive when you first hear it, because it sounds like you're not making a profit. Give more in value than you take in payment. No, of course not. It simply means we understand the difference between price and value. Price being a dollar figure, price being finite. Value, on the other hand, being defined as the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to the end user or beholder. In other words, what is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea, what have you, that brings so much worth or value to someone that they will happily and gladly exchange their money for it because they want this value so much. And so what happens is that person comes away from the exchange feeling great because they got more in use value than what they paid for. But of course, the entrepreneur, salesperson, business person, they also make a very, very healthy profit. In fact, the main characteristic of a free market-based exchange, free market simply meaning no one's forced to do business with anyone else, the main characteristic of a free market-based exchange is that both parties come away better off after the transaction than they were before the transaction.
Right. That's so important. I mean, that's the whole idea that everybody wins in a good business deal is essentially the point you're making. We need to take a break. I have a bunch of questions I want to ask you and your 2 avid readers, Bill and Charlie, when we come back after this break here on CEO Chat.
Stay with us. Now we're back.
Well, welcome back to CEO Chat. This guy's name is Joe Asamendi.
And that's Alcini.
I like when we do it that way.
Absolutely.
And that's in the spirit of the Go-Giver. Right. I'm going to give him an introduction. He gave me an introduction.
Right.
This book has been given over and over again by the people who are joining us here in the studio. And Bill, you had a story about that, about the importance of giving this book as a gift.
Yeah. Well, again, we've been talking about having salespeople and entrepreneurs and business owners read it. Mm-hmm. I've given it to a lot of those types of people over the years, but I've gotten feedback from some of them that they've given it to their teenagers.
Wow.
And because I always give it to them and I say, when you're done reading this, give this to somebody that you know needs to read this.
Really?
And so I've gotten tremendous feedback that it's really helped bring parents and teenagers closer together when they both understand the go-giver tendencies and the way that they can better interact with one another. So that's been quite revealing. So sure. I think every teenager, every college student in the country ought to read The Go-Giver.
No, I think that's terrific. And Charlie, you have given this copy of your book to Joe, then he's going to gift it to me. But go ahead and talk.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
On Tuesday I had a networking meeting with a colleague, and I noticed the quality of service that we were receiving from the server. And I watched her during the course of our meeting. Exceptional. So as we were leaving, I gave her a copy of the book. And I said, sometimes you wonder why people react to you so positively. The answer is in this book. And she just lit up like a tree. Then I said, when you're finished, give it to somebody else, pass it on.
You have to pay it forward.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Passing it along is really the
Absolutely.
secret to all this. The title of the book is The Go-Giver. The authors are Bob Burg and John David Mann. It's almost Christmas. This is a terrific gift for the business person in your life who can accelerate their results by changing their focus from what they think they want to what they learn other people actually need. Is that right, Bob?
That's a wonderful way to put it. You know, one of my heroes was Zig Ziglar, of course, as probably for many of you. His most famous saying, often misquoted, but the actual saying is, you can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want. He said it a lot better than I did in that magnificent Yazoo City, Mississippi Southern drawl he had. But that's really such a fantastic message, and that's really what it's all about. And again, there's nothing, you know, woo-woo about this or just, no, it makes sense when you think about it, that when we focus on bringing value to another human being, they feel good about us, they feel as though they know us, they like us, they trust us, and they're much more likely to want to do business with us.
That is so key. I mean, it's the power of servant leadership, which is a philosophy that's been around for a while. It's the power of the golden rule when you think about it, which is an age-old philosophy. And it's just a new way, really, of from a business person's point of view, of looking at some ancient wisdom that people have known for years make a difference in the quality of your life.
Right.
And so, Bob, where did this come from? What all of a sudden happened inside your head to make this happen?
Well, I had a book out years ago called Endless Referrals, Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales, which was written for people in sales who, you know, they may have loved what they did and provided great value through their product or service, but they didn't feel comfortable in the relationship building process. So that's really what Endless Referrals was about. But through the year, but it was a regular how-to book, and through the years I'd read a lot of business parables. I think starting with Og Mandino's Greatest Salesman in the World, Clapson's Richest Man in Babylon, and then in the late 70s, early 80s, Doctors Blanchard and Johnson, the 1 Minute series, right? 1 Minute Manager, 1 Minute Salesperson, and so forth, and many others through the years. There's been great, and every time I'd read a parable, I felt so good, and it taught me something, and I thought, you know, what if we could put the basic message of endless referrals, which is all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust, if we could put that in a parable form. So I asked John David Mann, who was the editor-in-chief of a magazine I wrote for, who was at that time not very well known. Now you walk into a bookstore and he's either ghostwritten or co-authored a number of New York Times bestsellers. He's in huge demand because he's so fantastic. But back then, not many people knew of his great talent. Fortunately, I did. And I asked him to be the lead writer, storyteller of with the Go-Giver. So he and I worked on it, and it turned out okay. We came up with the title, The Go-Giver. Took some basic laws based on the success principles that John and I had learned, lived by, studied, made mistakes from, in both our lives, and put together a story.
Well, the title is a great title. I mean, you couldn't have thought of a better title for the book. And you were saying at least so far 500,000 people have agreed with you that it's a worthwhile read. Is that right?
Yeah. We're closing in on the 750,000 mark, but we're not quite there yet. But that's our next goal, and then we'd like to get to the $1 million mark, and then we're going to start really getting serious about it.
That's terrific.
It's a good goal.
This is a book that you can get on Amazon. If you've got somebody who is already a giver, they'll find validation in this book. If you know somebody who's struggling, and maybe the reason why they're struggling is because they lack empathy, really are more focused on their own stuff, that this is not it's not a bad book to give somebody. They won't be insulted by it. They'll be educated by
Or as
it.
Bob said, teenagers. There were teenagers who read it.
And I'm thinking of teenagers maybe in particular. It's maybe not what you had in mind, Bob, when you wrote the book, but it's really a terrific gift. I think
We
just
love
about for
that,
everybody.
hearing that, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we have to take a break. We're finishing our second segment. We'll be back in a minute with more Bob Burg and Bill Borton and Charley Timmins. After this break, CEO Chat.
Stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to CEO Chat. My name is Alcini.
I'm still Joe Osamendi.
Just like you were before the break.
Absolutely.
Don't ever change.
I won't.
In the studio with us, we have Bill Borton and Charley Timmins. Both are avid readers of the book that we're talking about, with the author of the book, Bob Burg, who is joining us today via Skype from his home in Jupiter, Florida, which is it's a pleasure and an honor to have Bob with us. Now, there are other books in this series as well, Bob. I think we say there are 4 books already in this series. Maybe you can outline them for us?
Yeah, well, Go-Givers Sell More was the follow-up to the Go-Giver, and that's just, it's more the application base, so it's a lot of stories about it. We break down the laws in more detail, and then we feature stories of people who utilize the laws. Now, some of those people, again, as we mentioned earlier, we're doing it long before the book came out, and we feature them, and we also feature a lot of people who got the Go-Giver, and it really changed a lot of their business, and we use their stories as well. So that was
great.
That was a lot of fun. And then the market basically said to us, okay, so how does a leader take the principles in the Go-Giver and use them? And so we wrote the Go-Giver Leader as a follow-up. And again, that's another parable, and it's about a leader who discovers that great leadership is not about the leader. Great influence is not about the influencer, just as great salesmanship is not about the salesperson. It's always about the other person, about those whose lives you choose to touch and whose lives you want to bring value to. And then the next one is the coming out in April of 2018 is the Go-Giver Influencer. And that's a book really that focuses on people skills. As we often say, technical skills, talent, very important. But it's probably about 10% of success, because a lot of people have talent. There's a lot of talent out there. People skills is really the difference maker. And people skills, when you think about it, is really nothing more than the ability to attain what you want when working with others in such a way that you make the other person feel genuinely good about themselves, about the situation, and about you.
Well, that's great. I'm going to hold the book up again, even though you've all had plenty of chance to see the cover. The Go-Giver, get it on Amazon. It's a great gift to give to anybody that you know is in business. For whatever reason you think they might appreciate it. And, Bob, what I liked about it, just sort of thumbing through it, is that it's told in a very approachable way. You tell the story as a series of stories, parables, basically, that explain the effect of the principles that you try to drive home. Isn't that right?
Thank you. Yes, there's an old saying which isn't quite true, so we take it a little step further, and I really got this from John. There's a saying that facts tell, stories sell, and what John says, and I so agree with this. It makes so much sense. It's not that stories sell; it's that stories connect.
Yeah.
And it's once you're able to make a connection, a heart-to-heart connection, whether with the leader, with the reader, with your prospect, with your significant other, with what have you, that's when you can sell or influence or move a person to a desired action that's win-win involved. So, we really think the parable format, and again, with John as the lead writer, it makes it very easy to do.
That's terrific. And actually that's a great way to bring the conversation back into the studio with our 2 reader guests. Bill Borton, before the break, we talked a little bit about how you mentioned that you read the book up through the first 4 chapters and found validation in that. And then you started finding lessons in the later chapters of the book, things that you could use to make your own life better. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so most of the people that I've always known that were very giving, and the people that really live the first 4 Go-Giver principles have a real problem with receptivity. And so even you, Al, deflecting compliments. And
That's
so
why I like talking to these guys.
And
There's
so
a lesson in every conversation.
Learning how to allow the other person to give and to gratefully receive and say thank you. Like when you go out on a networking meeting with a woman and she wants to pick up the tab for lunch, I just smile and say thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you give the other person the chance. Bob and John David talk about the tide going out, coming in, the heart expanding and contracting. You have to have the give and take. You have to have the energy exchange. And without that, the other person never gets the joy of being the giver.
That's terrific. We're coming up on the end of the program. I don't want to cut you short because I want to hear Charley talk about. Charley, you're a professional coach.
That's correct.
How does the Go-Giver make a difference in what you do for a living?
Everybody's trying to get everybody else to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't care about you unless they know you care about them. And then they're going to act and they're going to wave your flag, they're going to be your advocate. The principles of the Go-Giver is the perfect template that they can use to bring people into their orbit and to develop advocates and champions on their behalf, because the people know they care about them.
So when you're coaching people to be their best selves, a key principle in that coaching process is to teach them to help other people be their best selves.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Bill and I do a joint networking, the Go-Giver way. We have a workshop that we do together.
Yes.
And the reaction from the people in there says, so this is how it's done well.
Wow,
You know,
that's
it's
so
not
key.
it's not about taking, it's about giving. And then eventually it'll all come back to you.
Great validation.
That's wonderful.
And that's what the book's about.
This has been a show about paying it forward. Bob Burg, thank you very much for joining us today via
Thank you.
Skype from Jupiter. It was wonderful talking to you, and you know, hey, I wish you the best with this book, but it seems to me like it's already working very well for you. And the other 3 titles in the series sound like, and the 4th book coming up in April, I think will be great. I want to thank Bill Borton for being with us and Charley Timmins for being with us. And I want to remind everybody out there, it's on Amazon and it's a great gift. Thank you all for joining us today on CEO Chat. This guy's Joe Asamendi.
That's Al Cine?
Yeah,
Once again.
nice hanging with you.
Absolutely.
And we hope you'll join us again next Friday, 10:30 and 11:30 for another episode of CEO Chat.
Have a great weekend. Be safe. Join us next week.
Thanks very much.